This woman is Yong-si, the head housekeeper of Korea's super plutocracy, the MBU group. Her top team is responsible for dealing with the secret affairs of the young masters and wives. Her eldest son, Won-soo, raced his car downtown after drinking. Then he was rounded up by arriving police cars. He looked out the window at the police with disdain. He closed his eyes in a relaxed manner. Shortly after, members of the top team arrived at the scene. They handed the police the phone number they had dialed. It turned out to be a request from the officer to release him. Won-soo just waltzed off. On the other side, this little boy is the third son of the Mao family. He was playing games in an internet cafe and didn't want to be disturbed, so he bought a whole row of seats. Two punks saw that he had money and came over to pick a fight. He pushed away the chair next to him. They fell and were about to teach him a lesson. The top team members reappeared and gave the punks a hard time before respectfully taking the third son home. Meanwhile, Won-jun, the second son, was being interviewed. The female reporter took away the camera and started teasing him. Won-jun calmly tells her to get dressed. The female reporter started to threaten him. At that moment, members of the top team arrived. They knew all about the reporter's scandal. The reporter was speechless. She could only leave in anger. On the other hand, Yong-soo was out on a date, but he secretly recorded the video. The top team members arrived in time and subdued the man. The video was taken care of. Madam had no worries at all. This is the daily life of the young masters and wives of the MBU group, and they can't get away with it without the support of the top team led by Yong-si. She's a former high-ranking judge in Korea. The team is made up of the best of the best. There's Lee Kyung-ya, a former reporter, former Special Forces soldier Kwon Jun-hee, and former prosecutor Yoon Sang-won. Mao and his team are in their hands. Nevertheless, something happened that they couldn't handle. The scene changes. The old man lying on the hospital bed is the founder of the Mao group. The man next to him is the old man's son, Chul-hee. He's not upset about his father's death. Instead, he's thinking about how to inherit the group, since his father's guardian is his only daughter, Soo-hee. Soo-hee's only daughter was his father's guardian. Soo-hee sent his daughter to New York 15 years ago, and sent a top team to keep a close eye on her, to prevent her from coming back to the country to compete with him for the inheritance. Unfortunately, Soo-hee in New York suddenly received an anonymous text message. She learned that her beloved grandfather was dying. She got on a flight back to her home country, avoiding Team Top. Soon after, the top team headquarters learned of the news. Yong-si immediately sent a team to the airport to intercept the flight. They used the airport's surveillance camera to capture Soo-hee's clothes. But when they went to check, it wasn't her. She had already changed her disguise and drove to the hospital. But on the way, she was rear-ended by a man. The man got out of the car and tried to extort money. Soo-hee looked at him with disdain and said, "I'll give you as much money as you want." Then they went to the police station. The man pretended to be miserable and told the officer what happened. Soo-hee refused to talk to the police because she was afraid that the gang would come, and her attitude made the police believe that the man was telling the truth. The man went even further and asked the police for a lawyer. He even threatened to send Soo-hee to jail. Soon after, the lawyer, Shu Yun-dao, arrived. Because he was too upright, no law firm would hire him. He approached and saw that Soo-hee had an extraordinary temperament and was definitely a rich man. So he bowed his head and told the man that he wanted 30% of the compensation as a commission. Then he left Soo-hee on the pretext of understanding the situation. At that moment, Soo-hee suddenly received the automated recording from the navigation system. When Shu Yun-dao accused her, she showed him the video evidence. He also sarcastically called him a third-rate lawyer who bullies women. After the two argued, Soo-hee tried to leave. That's when the top team led by Yong-si arrived. They immediately took control of Soo-hee. A lawyer, Shu Yun-dao, saw this and immediately came to his defense. He claimed to be Soo-hee's lawyer. Since it was at the police station, Yong-si had to stop. Shu Yun-dao himself drove her to the hospital to see her grandfather. After 15 years, Soo-hee felt guilty looking at her unconscious grandfather because of Soo-hee's return. That night, the family gathered to discuss the heir apparent. Won-soo went up to greet him with enthusiasm, but Soo-hee ignored him. It turned out that Yong-soo at the table was his stepmother. These young men were born to her father and his stepmother, but Soo-hee had never seen this young man before. She thought he was the son of those two young men. They denied it with a wave of their hands. Then Soo-hee turned her attention to her stepmother. She looked incredulous. The boy quickly denied it. It turned out that the boy was born to her father and another woman. This family's relationship is really messed up. Soo-hee introduced herself to the boy as his half-sister. At that moment, Chul-hee arrived at the restaurant. Everyone stood up to greet him. Only Soo-hee sits with a blank face. During the meal, Soo-hee teasingly asked his father how many moms he had. This embarrassed his father. Then the father accused Soo-hee of going home without permission. Soo-hee asked his father if he needed permission to go back to his house. "I wasn't there when my mother died. Now that grandpa is dying, I can't leave." Father had nothing to say, but he was angry and tried to force her to go back. Soo-hee said she's against it in no uncertain terms. There was a lot of tension. Soo-hee declared her sovereignty. After that, she left in style. A family feud began. How will she take back what's hers? The next day, in a clothing store, this woman is a star. Not only did she tell the clerk what to do, she even threw the dress in his face. Then Soo-hee, who was also picking up clothes at the store, came to hear her. She realized it was actress Lena. Lena didn't know who Soo-hee was. She told Soo-hee to get lost. Soo-hee didn't let her get away with it. it either. Then they got into a fight. Passers-by saw the actress fighting. They gathered at the door to take pictures. At that moment, Xu Yundao, who happened to be passing by, also gathered around. He saw that it was Suhee, whom he met at the police station a few days ago. He was so surprised that he came to the door to look at it. Then Xu Yundao rushed in and stopped Suhee. He thought Suhee was jealous of Lena, and Suhee gave him a kick in the ass without saying a word. At that moment, 3 cars arrived. It's Yongxi's top team. Seeing Yongxi's appearance, Lena threatened to send Suhee to jail. She looked puzzled. Then Yongxi introduced Suhee to Lena as the only daughter of the group's chairman. Suhee gets up and asks Yongxi why she's taking care of an actress. Yongxi said she's a contracted model for the group. Apparently, Suhee didn't believe that. She mocked star Lena for having no substance. Because she was afraid of Suhee's status, Lena could only play the poor girl. Then they went to the lobby. Yongxi said to the onlookers, if you destroy the video and photos on your cell phone, you can get the cash on the spot. Those who took the money left happily. The last one who stayed, Xu Yundao, refused to take the money. He said he didn't take any photos or videos. At that moment, the phone rang. It was the landlord calling for rent. Because his job was not going well, he could no longer afford the rent. Suhee saw this scene. She was impressed by him. Suhee took his cell phone and left her number, and invited him to work for the group. But Xu Yundao felt humiliated. He grabbed the phone and turned around and left. At this point, Suhee's feelings for him seemed to have increased a little. When Xu Yundao returned home that night, he saw his father still busy in the restaurant late at night. He felt a sense of guilt. It turned out that the landlord had already called his father. Due to the downturn in the family's business and his own job failure, father and son were overwhelmed by the high rent. When he got back to his room, thinking back to the job Suhee had introduced him to, under pressure, he got up and picked up his cell phone to call Suhee, but his pride got the better of him. Just as he put down his cell phone, it rang. Suhee asked him to meet him the next day. The next day, they met at a restaurant. Suhee said he wanted to hire him as his personal lawyer. He asked him to look into the strange number that tipped him off in New York. Xu Yundao said that his lawyer's fee was very expensive, but Suhee offered him $20 million to be his personal lawyer. Xu Yundao immediately agreed. He gave the number to his policeman friend to check it out. On the other side, Yongxi also learned that someone was tipping off Suhee. It turns out that the number is registered illegally, and the owner can't be traced. But the text message was sent from Suhee's neighborhood. She was in doubt. The next day, Xu Yundao came downstairs to the Mao group in formal attire, ready to officially report to Suhee. By now, the top team had already found out all the information about Xu Yundao. While they were analyzing whether Xu Yundao was qualified for the position, Suhee came in with a big strut. He said that the top team's way of choosing people is very backward. Xu Yundao came in and greeted everyone. The alarm suddenly went off. It turns out that a man was trying to jump from the roof of the company. Faced with this incident, the top team found out through the roof camera that the man was an employee of the company. His daughter used to work for the company. She died in an accident last year. The man applied to the company for a work-related injury, but the company refused to recognize it, and then rejected it for various reasons. Now the man is protesting with his life against the injustice done to him. A former prosecutor said, the man's illegal entry into a private building and his illegal demonstration are aggravating factors. The ex-reporter who arrived later said, 3 media outlets have been blocked. If the matter is resolved within 15 minutes, it won't be exposed. Suhee and Xu Yundao can't do anything about this inhumane treatment. Yongxi rushed to the roof with the man's file. She promised to take responsibility. The man was satisfied and retreated, but several security guards immediately took him under control. It's obvious that Yongxi was lying about what she said. After seeing all this, Suhee and Xu Yundao left in anger. They met the man downstairs. He was still being pushed by the security guards. Suhee couldn't hold back her anger any longer. She walked over to him in anger. Seeing the indifferent and smiling staff, Suhee's face was full of boredom. She grabbed the takeout from the clerk's hand. She took a bite and threw it on the floor. Xu Yundao followed her without knowing why. Then she grabbed the car in front of the door. Then she crashed into the van next to the man. This action stunned the crowd. Then Suhee got out of the car and asked the man if he was hurt. Then she offered to pay him a huge amount of money. After that, he left. Xu Yundao stayed where he was and froze. The scene changes to the police station. Suhee emphasized his crime to the officer. The officer said that he had never seen such a confession before. The man next to her knows that he's not accusing her. Suhee asks Xu Yundao how much it costs to raise a child. The man said he had 2 children. The policeman said it wouldn't be enough for $100 million. Suhee said it would be $1 billion. Then he called Yongxi and demanded $1 billion. Otherwise, he'll expose what he did to the media. Soon after, the man received a notification that the money had arrived. He looked at Suhee with a surprised face. Suhee said take care of the kid and left in style. At that moment, Xu Yundao received a call from Yongxi. Due to Suhee's capriciousness, The company lost $1 billion. Yongsi decided to ask Xu Yundao to join the top lawyers, and to be Su He's exclusive lawyer. He looked at the terms of the contract with disdain, until he saw the salary on the last page. He immediately agreed, but Yongsi demanded that he report Su He's every move to him. Xu Yundao agreed without hesitation. Then Yongsi showed Xu Yundao how the top handled things. There were 3 suitcases on the table. Li Kyung-ya opened the first one. It was full of money, and told Xu Yundao that it was just for handling things. Then the second and third suitcases were opened. The money was for urgent matters that needed cash. Then he was given a car key and the key to the group's residence. And finally, a bank card. The top team advised him to clean up his image. On the other hand, Soo-hee visited her grandfather in the hospital. She recalled something from back then. This woman was a witness to the murder 15 years ago. She was also Soo-hee's babysitter since she was a child. After her mother's accident, Soo-hee overheard her reporting to his stepmother. That's why he was suspicious. Then Mr. Yoon came in. He's the chairman's personal lawyer. He told Soo-hee that the chairman also wanted her to inherit the company. And before he does, he suggests buying more shares. It'll be safer. Soo-hee understands what Mr. Yoon is thinking. After everything that happened, she knows how scary the top team can be. In the end, Soo-hee asked Mr. Yoon if it was him who texted her back in New York, but it turned out it wasn't. On the other hand, Xu Yundao asked his cop friend to look into Soo-hee's mother's case. The cop friend told him that the file had disappeared for some reason. Xu Yundao said he had already guessed it. The next morning, the servants of the Zaibatsu family were already busy. They neatly prepared breakfast for their master. Then Soo-hee came in. Curious, she asked what was on the cart. The maid replied that it was Picasso's breakfast. She didn't understand. In front of a fish tank, 2 maids worked together to feed the fish with gold leaf. Soo-hee was shocked. Picasso is the fish in front of him. On the other side, Won-jun woke up. In the bed next to him is his wife Soo-jin. They've been sleeping in separate beds since they got married. Won-jun said he'll divorce her when he becomes the heir. Breakfast is ready. Everyone's coming to the dining room. Soo-hee is still indifferent to the arrival of the head of the family. She even asked for steak during the meal. Everyone looked at her with surprise, but she said in all seriousness that it was steak time in New York. Then the maid told her that Xu Yundao was here. It's her first time in a plutocrat's house. Xu Yundao introduces herself to everyone. Yong-shu gave him a warm welcome and thanks him for taking care of Soo-hee. His father, Chul-hee, wanted Xu Yundao to stay on for a long time, but how long he can really work depends on money. Xu Yundao says he doesn't think so. Chul-hee seriously reiterated his attitude. His unquestioning look caused Soo-hee's displeasure. She dropped the spoon, got up and dragged Xu Yundao to her room. Soo-hee thought Xu Yundao was tacky. She gave him a fountain pen for his suit. Then he was told to go back to work. Fu-ki is a journalist. His staff is always on the prowl for celebrities and trying to dig up gossip. But Fu-ki is different. He's been watching the Mao family for a long time. This time, he finally waited for an opportunity. He exposed the group's Won-jun secret. The news immediately hit the hotspot. When Yong-si found out, he called a meeting with everyone. On the other hand, the group's acting chairman, Chul-hee, was furious when he found out. He went straight to Top's office to vent his frustration. Yong-si promised to take care of it within 3 days. The coded man in the video is the leaker. The members of Top immediately recognized him as the group's director, Mr. Park. That's when Yong-si got a call from Mr. Cho. He was told that due to the impact of the leak, they had to investigate the group. The person in charge is Prosecutor Lee. He happens to be a friend of the former prosecutor of the Top group. Then former reporter Lee Kyung-ya found his own team to disguise Won-jun's scandal as a good deed. At that time, Xu Yundao also found Mr. Park, who broke the news. He promised that the Top team wouldn't give him a hard time. He brought him to Yong-si. Yong-si asked him how much money he wanted. Mr. Park said he didn't need a lot of money. He thanked her for her tolerance. But the next moment, Yong-si went back on her words. It turns out that their conversation was recorded. As expected, the Top team is as ruthless as ever. Xu Yundao felt that it was too much, so he went to Yong-si to argue. Yong-si dismissed him with a few words. At that moment, Soo-hee sent him a text message asking him to come to her. Seeing that the news is all about Won-jun, Soo-hee couldn't help but feel that Top is really doing everything. She asked Xu Yundao if he was part of it. Xu Yundao realized that the pen Soo-hee gave him this morning was defective. It turns out to be a bug. He was angry that he was being used again. He says he wants to be a member of the real Top, but Soo-hee told him there's something else going on at Top. Does she have another team? The next day, the Top team successfully solved the secret leakage crisis. Chul-hee is satisfied. Yong-si said that Soo-hee met with Mr. Yoon earlier. He might be interested in running a company. She suggests that the last resort is to get Soo-hee married. Yong-shu, who was next to him, was overjoyed. She wants Soo-hee to get married quickly. Soo-hee came in a little while later with a snack. Chul-hee asked her if she wanted to get married or go back to New York. At that moment, Soo-hee also saw through their thoughts. She said she wasn't interested in running a company. She agreed to get married. The 3 of them look puzzled and can't believe she's thinking this way. Soo-hee saw that they didn't believe her and offered to go on a blind date. They were so happy. Soon she got the information about her date. The man was a prosecutor. Looking at the photo and the name, she remembered the prosecutor Joe, who was bribed by Yong-si after her mother's accident, and the match was the prosecutor's son, Tae-hyung. The next day, they met at a restaurant. Tae-hyung was very pleased with the beautiful Soo-hee, and Soo-hee didn't say anything. He said that if he wanted to be the son-in-law of a rich family. He had to have the ability to match. Tae-hyung said he was a prosecutor who graduated from a prestigious university, but Soo-hee didn't care about that. Then he mocked him and left. Tae-hyung was furious. He vowed to show her the consequences of offending a prosecutor. Soon after, several prosecutors approached Soo-hee. They suspected Soo-hee was involved in drugs. Sure enough, they found stolen goods. Then she was arrested. Xu Yundao told her not to say anything. On the other hand, Yong-si learned that Soo-hee had been arrested. Prosecutor Cho, who he had worked with before, said it was all because Soo-hee had offended his son on a blind date. She then reported it to Chul-hee. Chul-hee is furious and asks Yong-si to get her out immediately. Yong-si thinks it's a good time to buy the company's stock. The longer Soo-hee stays inside, the better for him to inherit the company. Hearing this, Chul-hee agrees. On the other hand, Tae-hyung wants to send Soo-hee to the detention center for the reason that it takes 2 weeks to get the result of the urine test. Xu Yundao immediately defended Soo-hee. Yong-si interrupted him. He told him to follow Tae-hyung's advice. He also told Soo-hee to apologize to Tae-hyung. Soo-hee made it clear that he didn't use drugs. Even if he went to jail, he couldn't apologize. After they left, Soo-hee told Xu Yundao that the top team and Tae-hyung had reached an agreement. The only way to get out now is to find proof of his innocence. Then Soo-hee was taken to jail. She looked around with curiosity and felt a lot of emotions. Then she was taken into the cell by the guards. Then she threw her bedding on the floor. She introduced herself to her 3 cellmates. They looked at her with disdain. Soo-hee suddenly yelled at the top of his lungs. When the guards arrived, she stopped yelling. Then the attitude of the 3 changed immediately. On the other hand, the Zaibatsu family is having dinner. The housekeeper told Chul-hee that the prosecutor's office is going to close down the company. Looks like Soo-hee's previous attempts to provoke Tae-hyung are working. It's time for the prison meal. Looking at the meager food, Soo-hee dropped the spoon in her hand. Then she went to the window and tapped on it. Soon after, the guards delivered a hearty lunch. The inmates were overjoyed. As expected of a lady from a wealthy family, the scene changes. It's time for labor. Soo-hee is sitting and resting. Then one of her cellmates got a stomachache. The female inmate who was also being guarded came over. She said he was pretending to be sick and kicked her in the face. Soo-hee couldn't stand it. They got into a fight. Then the guards came. The female inmate ran away. The inmate came over to thank Soo-hee. On the other hand, Yong-si from the top team is going to release a few cases to Tae-hyung and ask him to stop investigating the group. At that moment, Xu Yundao found Soo-hee in prison to find out what happened. Soo-hee recalled that she left her handbag outside when she was trying on clothes at a clothing store. Xu Yundao speculated that someone might have tampered with it at that time. But the question is, how did the store know she was coming to try on clothes? Then Soo-hee remembered the day before. Soojin recommended that store to her. She's the only one who knows about her schedule. With these clues, Xu Yundao immediately set off. He found the female reporter who had been following Soo-hee. In exchange for an exclusive interview with Soo-hee, he was able to get all the information. Sure enough, the camera recorded the woman's crime. Then Xu Yundao found a police friend to check it out. He found out that this woman, Mei Lai, had a criminal record, so he accessed Mei Lai's address and came to check it out. After a night of squatting, he finally waited for Mei Lai. When Seo Yun-tae took out the video footage, she didn't argue anymore. She told Xu Yundao all about her crime. It's true that Soojin is framing Soo-hee, but Soojin didn't care about it. It seems that the top team is behind all this. Then he went to Tae-hyung with the evidence. Tae-hyung had to confess in front of the evidence. Soo-hee was also acquitted. She was so excited, but Xu Yundao, who was in the passenger seat, was scared out of her wits. Soo-hee drove straight to a hotel. She got on the elevator and stopped Xu Yundao outside. She asked him to buy her underwear. Xu Yundao went to the lingerie store in embarrassment. He came back, dropped off his clothes and waited downstairs. Soo-hee came out of the shower a little while later. On his way home, Yong-si called Xu Yundao and told him to return to the office immediately. Both of them knew that Yong-si wouldn't be satisfied with destroying the top team's plan. He then went to the office. As soon as he entered, Yong-si said to Xu Yundao, "You're fired." Xu Yundao argued his case. He was Soo-hee's attorney before he was a top employee. This is what he should do. Then Yong-si decided not to fire him. Soo-hee is visiting her grandfather in the hospital. She leaves the butler to talk to Mr. Yoon about acquiring the group's stock. Mr. Yoon told her that there wasn't enough money, so Soo-hee decided to meet with the investors. This grandmother is known as the Milk Witch. She's a famous investor in the capitalist circle. She is also the investor Soo-hee is looking for. During the negotiation, she told Soo-hee, she and her grandfather have known each other for 30 years. Now she's sorry to see her friend's granddaughter and son competing for the inheritance. But Soo-hee said she didn't want to fight with her father. She just wants to catch the real killer of her mom. But catching the real killer requires the company's power and money. That's why she's fighting for it. The grandmother didn't agree to lend her the money right away. But when Soo-hee was leaving, she said she was too much like his grandfather. On the other hand, Yong-si also found out about Soo-hee's move. She told the top team to buy out the high investors' shares immediately. That night, she reported back to Chul-hee. Now they've convinced 4 high-value investors. With Milkwit's character of never losing money, she will definitely not help Soo-hee. Chul-hee will then become the largest shareholder of the group. Chul-hee was very happy to hear that. Yong-si also suggested that he take over the group at his mother's 30th anniversary ceremony the day after tomorrow. Chul-si was very happy. What they didn't know was that Mr. Yoon had found the milk witch. She gladly transferred 50% of her outstanding shares to Soo-hee. She wanted Soo-hee to lead the next era. Mr. Yoon thanked her and went to the hospital. He excitedly reported the good news to the old chairman in his hospital bed. Butler Young locked the door behind him. Soon it was time for the ceremony. Chul-hee led the family and group executives to attend. The servants neatly poured wine for each guest. And today, Chul-hee was about to announce to them that he was officially taking over the group. Just as everyone was raising their glasses to congratulate him, Butler Young pushed the old chairman in. Then the old chairman said he'd give all the real estate in circulation to his granddaughter, Soo-hee. In the event of Soo-hee's accident or death, all the property will be donated to the community. The old chairman's appearance was a blow to those who had an ulterior motive. He took his granddaughter's hand and felt a lot of emotions. At this moment, housekeeper Jin came in. It turns out she's been on the chairman's side all along. She deliberately approached Yong-shu and the top team to hide her identity. She was also the one who tipped off Soo-hee. Soo-hee felt guilty that he was wrong about Young. On the other hand, Yong-si and Chul-hee didn't give up. They discussed how to deal with the old chairman's sudden move. Yong-si said that Soo-hee has the largest share and should be the chairman of the group, but it's customary for the new chairman to be elected at the shareholders meeting. In the meantime, it's their last chance. At that moment, Mrs. Young found Soo-hee after seeing the old chairman off. She handed Soo-hee a note. She said it was Insoon, the maid who was framed for killing her mother 15 years ago. Since Insoon was sent to prison, Yong-si took care of her. We don't even know where she is now. Finding her may lead to the truth of the murder. Soo-hee then called Shu Yun-dao to find her. Shu Yun-dao was shocked. He got up and went to the bedroom and took out a case file. He found out from the file that a murder trial was held 15 years ago. This woman was sentenced to life imprisonment. She was shocked to hear the verdict. She immediately shouted at the judge and asked Yong-si how she could be different from what she had promised. But there was no one left to hear her defense. Her child was screaming for her mom. This child is now the attorney Shu Yun-dao. For 15 years, he visited his mother in prison every year, but all he's gotten is the mother's repeated refusal. Today, he came to the prison again on Soo-hee's orders. He finally met his mother, but 15 years have made her forget her son's face. She thought he was a lawyer sent by the syndicate. When Shu Yun-dao called out his mom, she seemed to remember something. It turns out that after her mother was imprisoned, father changed Shu Yun-dao's name. Shu Yun-dao asked her mother why she refused to visit her for 15 years. She just apologized and didn't answer. When asked if she knew Yong-si and how Yong-shu died, she denied it as if she was afraid of something. She said she was just a criminal and asked him to stop looking into it. Seeing his mother like this, Shu Yun-dao was determined to clear her name. After returning to her cell, she recalled what Yong-si had said. It turned out that Yong-si had used her son to threaten her to confess, and he didn't allow her to see his son. After the old chairman announced Soo-hee's succession, Yong-si had the company's current shareholding ratio pulled up. She realized that Chul-hee and Soo-hee's shares are similar. If she can get all the small shareholders together, there's still a chance to turn things around at the election. They took action immediately. Kwon Jun he prepared a truck full of gifts and hand-delivered them to each micro-investor. Lee Kyung-ya threatened the shareholders who supported Soo-hee with the black information he had. On the other hand, Soo-hee found Shu Yun-dao and asked him how his man was doing. Shu Yun-dao didn't answer. He took her directly to the prison. Soo-hee visited Insoon alone. She wanted Insoon to tell the truth, but Insoon replied that he really didn't see the murderer. Soo-hee left disappointed. After leaving the prison, Shu Yun-dao became emotional. He told the truth about Insoon's kindness. This caused Soo-hee to question him. He thought that Shu Yun-dao was a spy arranged by top to get close to him. Shu Yun-dao admitted to his face that Insoon was his mother. Soo-hee was shocked. She blamed Shu Yun-dao for not clearing her mother's name after all these years. Shu Yun-dao told her that it was the first time she had seen her mother in 15 years. Because she was threatened by Yong-si, she refused to see him. Soo-hee is furious when she realizes what happened. On the way home, she also revealed her heart. After her mother's accident, she was sent to America alone for 15 years. At first, the young girl suffered from the pain of her mother's murder. All she knew was how to get drunk all day and all night. Suddenly, one day she received a message saying that the murderer was someone else, and she came to her senses. Due to the 24-hour surveillance by the top team, she had to use nightclubs as a cover to create the illusion of her extravagance. In fact, she secretly searched for information on her mother's murder in the VIP room. She told Shu Yun-dao that the reason why she insisted on getting the inheritance is to destroy top. She was convinced that Shu Yun-dao, who was deeply victimized, would support her. The next day, The Zaibatsu Group's election day was held as scheduled. The family came to the restaurant early for dinner. Wansu asked Suhi to support his movie if he was elected chairman. Suhi smiled and ignored him. She picked up some juice and drank it, but the maid behind her gave a strange look. Suhi also realized something was wrong but didn't say anything. She put down the glass and turned around to leave. Chulhi watched this with a sinister look on her face. After leaving the house, Suhi drove to the office, but not long after she drove, she ran into a traffic cop for a dway. Sure enough, she was found to have been drinking. On the other hand, all the shareholders of the company had already arrived. The people who are waiting for Suhi are getting irritated. Xu Yundao called but there was no answer. At that moment, one of the shareholders saw the news on his cell phone that Suhi had been arrested for drunk driving. Others saw the news one after another. They shouted at the meeting leader to vent their frustration. Xu Yundao immediately went to the police station. At that moment, Yongxi was in her office watching the conference and the surveillance video of Suhi's arrest. She seems to be enjoying the moment. On the other hand, Xu Yundao came to the police station and identified himself as Suhi's defense attorney, but she asked for a doctor. She said she has a rare disease called autoalcoholism. It was detected in the US. It's a disease that turns into alcohol when it absorbs carbohydrates. Because she was afraid of being used by Top, she hasn't said anything since she returned home. I didn't even go to the hospital, but they found out anyway. They must have tampered with the juice in the morning. On the other hand, the old chairman who learned the news got emotional and suffered a relapse. The attending doctor recommended rest and recuperation. Just as the doctor was leaving, a member of the top team saw it all. They reported it to Yongxi. At this time, after the hospital examination, Suhi was acquitted. After Xu Yundao sent her home, she went to her grandfather's bedside first. She apologized for what happened to her, and he told her that it wasn't over yet. He told her to be ready at any time. The next day, the old chairman asked Xu Yundao and Mr. Yin to draw up a complaint, and sent them both to the court quickly. They sued Top for forcing the shareholders. He also called an emergency board meeting in his name. On the other hand, Yongxi also found out about it. She didn't care about the court case. She only cares about the emergency board meeting, because it could jeopardize all her previous efforts. She arranged for her men to change the meeting place from the company to her home, and she reported it to Chulhi. Chulhi was anxious when she found out about the emergency meeting. Then the old chairman arrived. He kicked out Yongxi. Then he reprimanded Chulhi for his dirty tricks. He told him that he's still in charge here. After the old chairman left, Yongxi advised him to take a gamble. Chulhi also understood her idea. Yongxi came out and found Suhi. She advised Suhi to consider the old chairman's safety. It's better to give up the group. Suhi rejected the idea without a second thought. Soon after, an emergency board meeting was held at the Mbu Group's mansion. The chairman called the company's top executives to attend. He presented his granddaughter Suhi's medical report. He explained the accident. It was his son, Chulhi, who took advantage of her condition. Then he showed them Suhi's excellent graduation certificate. The board members were immediately impressed by Suhi. The old chairman is also happy to propose that we eat and chat. On the other hand, Yongxi is sitting alone in her office. Her eyes were closed as if she was waiting for something. Soon, the maid brought the delicious food in front of everyone. During the meal, they kept praising the flavor of the sauce. The butler replied that the sauce was made from raw almonds. The old chairman was very pleased. He asked the butler to add more for himself. The chairman was eating happily, but the butler secretly sent a message to Yongxi. He said that the meal would be over soon. When Yongxi saw it, she immediately called Suhi. She asked Suhi to pass the phone to Mr. Chairman, but after hearing the call, he suddenly felt like he couldn't breathe. Soon after, he passed away in front of everyone. It turns out Yongxi had found the chairman's doctor. He found out that his heart was weak. A small amount of raw almonds and sugar can harm it. In addition, Mr. Chairman had suffered from stress before. If he gets irritated again, it could be life-threatening. Apparently, Yongxi's plan worked. The sudden death of the old chairman was a big shock to everyone around him. The one who was most saddened was Suhi. The only person close to him is gone. Now, the old chairman's son wants to hold a luxurious funeral, but she's trying to stop him. She is afraid that Chulhi will be caught in a public controversy if he becomes president. She asked for a quiet family funeral. Soon after, the funeral started in a small room in the mansion. The plutocrat who led an era has fallen. Only close relatives and the top team were present. After the funeral, Yongxi threatened Butler Young and lawyer Yoon to get rid of them. He told them to cut off contact with Suhi, otherwise, he would frame them. They had no choice but to sign a contract. Back home, Suhi went into his grandfather's room alone. The laughter of the past is now gone. She picked up her cell phone and called Mr. Young and Mr. Yoon, but she couldn't get through. Her helplessness crushed her. Tears of sadness flowed down her face. On the other side, Chulhi has officially become the chairman, but Suhi is still the biggest shareholder of the group, so Yongxi tried to get Xu Yundao on his side. He wanted him to spy on Suhi under the pretext of joining the top team, and then he took him to the core area of the top team. They bragged about their high technology. He even asked Xu Yundao to search for a random name on the computer. He was about to look up his mother's information, but he thought Yongxi was behind him, so he typed in his own name. Sure enough, all the information came up at once. He was convinced that the truth of his mother's case must be hidden in there as well. On the other hand, Chul-hee became the head of the Zaibatsu group by murdering his father, but his daughter holds the most shares in the conglomerate. That night, he found Soo-hee. Young-si told her that the share structure had changed, and handed her a document. She opened it and saw that her father's shares were now equal to her own. Young-si said that after the old chairman's accident, they bought out the shares of 2 of his close associates. He also took out a contract to give up the business and asked her to sign it. Soo-hee was furious and asked Young-si why she was still doing this when she was no longer the largest shareholder. But Young-si argued that holding too many shares would hinder the chairman's decision. He asked her to give up the old chairman's inheritance. Chul-hee was shocked by his words. Soo-hee said she'd sign away her inheritance if she told her who killed her grandfather. And Young-si didn't hesitate to admit that he killed the old chairman. Soo-hee didn't expect Young-si to admit it without hesitation. She said she had to think about it. She took a piece of gum and stood up. She walked back and forth in the room as if she was waiting for something. At that moment, Young-si called in Kwon Jun-hee, who was outside. He grabbed Soo-hee's cell phone and gave it to Young-si. It's a recording of their conversation. Young-si took out her own cell phone and played a recording of Soo-hee's fake confession. It seems that she's determined to win this time. Soo-hee had no choice but to sign. Before she left, she threw the gum into the fish tank. Chul-hee was also shocked by Young-si's ruthlessness. Soo-hee returned to her room and took out a hidden tape recorder. That very night, Chul-hee, who witnessed Young-si's methods, called Won-jun to his room to tell him what to do. Late at night, a woman's scream came from the Chaeble's mansion. Risk management top team responded immediately. It turns out Young-si's pet fish, Picasso, is dead. The cause of death was a piece of gum thrown by Soo-hee. She was crying in front of the fish tank. Then she gathered the top team. She decided to organize a funeral for the fish. It was ridiculous, but they had to do it. A member of the top team handed her an invitation list. It turned out to be a list of dignitaries: the director of the National Museum of Art, the Minister of Land, and the chief of police. When she found out that the museum director was traveling abroad, she sent a member of top to bring him back by private jet. Soon the funeral ceremony began in her own yard. All the guests were dressed in black. They all held white chrysanthemums in their hands. Everything was done according to the highest standards of etiquette. Soo-hee at home quietly watched the ceremony, thinking that Grandpa's funeral was worse than a fish. It's so ironic. Everyone observed a moment of silence and laid flowers. And that was the end of the ridiculous funeral. The next day, Soo-hee, who had lost everything, found Xu Yun-dao. He told him how the inheritance was taken away from him. He advised Xu Yun-dao to accept Young-si's invitation to become an official member of the top. He might be able to find out the truth about the murder inside the top and avenge his mother's death. Xu Yun-dao also encouraged Soo-hee not to lose heart, to find himself again. Then he asked Soo-hee what he wanted to do in the future, and Soo-hee decided to go crazy again. Then she gave him the evidence of the previous recording. At home, Xu Yun-dao listened to the recording and strengthened his conviction. The next day, he approached Young-si and told him what he wanted to do. Young-si was very happy. He took him to the inner office of top again. This was the first time he saw how top worked. There was a huge screen displaying information about all the family members, including Evrion's expenses and itinerary. They realized that Soo-hee's recent trips were to bars, clubs, and restaurants, and the amount of money spent at each place was mind-boggling. The members suggested limiting her spending, but Young-si didn't care. She said that spending money is her only pleasure. After checking Evrion's condition, they called it a day. Back in the office, Young-si was still suspicious of Xu Yun-dao. He arranged for his men to dig deeper into his background. That's when Chul-hee called. The scene changes. They arrived at a private estate. Chul-hee told Young-si that he wanted Won-jun to take over his business. He also asked her to prepare for the young master's succession ceremony as soon as possible. He wanted to see his son take over. When he returned home, he found Won-jun and entrusted him with the task. He said that Young-si is the protector of the organization. No one can touch the foundation of the organization except her. On the other hand, Young-si, who realized Chul-hee's intention, immediately gathered the top team to plan Won-jun's rise to power. She planned to attack the plutocratic family one by one. She wants them to sign an agreement to give up their inheritance. But it's not that easy. It was during the meeting, Xu Yun-dao learned that the third master's mother was actually Lena. He was shocked. After work, Xu Yun-dao immediately found Soo-hee. At this time, Soo-hee has resumed his nightclub style. They are also using the club as a cover to discuss their strategy in the VIP room. Soo-hee analyzed that he was so eager to decide on a successor. Chul-hee must be worried that he'll follow the old chairman's path. He's already afraid of Young-si, so he decided to use Young-si's suspicion to create problems in the family and cause internal strife. The next day, Fu-ki and Gang-mi were studying Soo-hee's mom's murder. Gang-mi felt that Xu Yun-dao resembled one of her elementary school classmates. She had also heard that the classmate's mom had killed a rich and powerful woman. When Fu-ki heard that, he had an idea. He decided to investigate. On the other hand, Xu Yun-dao came to the police station and found Detective Wu. He hoped that he could help his mother to reopen the case. This way, Detective Wu could get a promotion and a raise, and his mother could be cleared of any wrongdoing. Detective O was so impressed that he agreed. Due to Young-si's constant surveillance, so Xu Yun-dao used Detective O's cell phone to ask Soo-hee out. He told Soo-hee that Young-si had begun to suspect him, and asked him to prove his innocence. Soo-hee was very confident. He told Xu Yun-dao not to worry, he could prove it for him. He also asked Xu Yun-dao to arrange a trip to the prison tomorrow. The next day, They went to the prison and met In-soon again. Soo-hee begged her to tell the truth about what happened back then. In-soon was still scared. After Soo Yoon-dae's comforting persuasion, she finally spoke. She said that before Soo-hee's mother was killed, she used to get headaches. When she took medicine, she'd sleep all day. Soo Yoon-dao asked what kind of medicine, but she said she couldn't remember. She only knew it was a white pill. She was given it by Dr. Young-shu, who is now terrorizing her. Soo-hee had a big fight with the doctor over it. Soo Yoon-dao asked her mother if she remembered the doctor's name. She said she only remembered his last name. After finding out what happened, the two of them left. Soon they found Dr. Shu. Dr. Shu couldn't hide it any longer, so she told them the truth. It turns out Young-shu and Dr. Shu used to work at the same hospital. Dr. Shu had a medical accident and Young-shu found out about it. She threatened Dr. Shu into giving Soo-hee's mother a toxic drug. This led to the tragedy. Soo-hee's hands were shaking with anger when she found out the truth, but she thinks Young-shu is just one of the murderers, so she can't do anything yet. She has to slowly unravel the truth about the murder and bring justice to her mother. The next day, Chol-hee and Won-jun found Young-si. He wanted to announce that Won-jun was the heir to the group as soon as possible. Young-si advised him to make him the vice president to avoid any bad influence. Wait until next year. At that moment, Won-jun spoke up. Since Young-si gave Won-soo shares, he thinks it's too much. Young-si explained that he deserved it as the eldest son. Chol-hee was silent. Won-jun saw this and held his tongue. After Young-si left, Chol-hee told Won-jun that Young-si is a double-edged sword. The future of the group is in her hands. That's why we have to watch her again. At that moment, Soo Yoon-dao found Soo-hee again. He said he didn't find the murder file in Top's computer. Then the two of them organized the clues in their hands. Soo-hee analyzed that the case file should be hidden in Young-si's office. So Soo Yoon-dao approached Detective Oh at the police station. He asked him to investigate Young-si quietly. Detective Oh agreed readily. On that day, Butler Young of the Zaibatsu family sneaked past the surveillance and came to Soo Yoon-dae's house. After talking to him at length, I found out that it was Jung's mother, In-soon, who introduced her to the Zaibatsu family. She knew In-soon's character well. She didn't believe she was a murderer. Then she gave Soo Yoon-dao a copy of the judgment. She told him that it was left by Judge Lee, who tried the case. Soo Yoon-dao was very happy to get the judgment. It meant he could ask the court to reopen the murder case. He immediately called Soo-hee and Detective Oh to Fu-kiss office. After combing through the case, they analyzed that Young-si and Prosecutor Cho must be related. If they wanted to reopen the case, they had to find out their relationship, so they split up. Fu-ki and Gang Mi followed Young-si. Soo-hee used Soo Yoon-dae's evidence to find Prosecutor Joe. She showed him evidence of bribery and gave him two choices. Either work with him to catch Young-si and get promoted, or continue to work with Young-si and end up in jail together. Prosecutor Cho hesitated but left. Then he asked Young-si out. He told her about his meeting with Soo-hee. Young-si was confused. She knew that Soo-hee alone couldn't find the evidence, so on her way back to the office, she asked the top members to re-investigate Soo Yoon-dao, and the results made her break out in a cold sweat. Soo Yoon-dao is In-soon's son. Soon after, she called Soo Yoon-dao to her office. Before he could say anything, Young-si called out Soo Yoon-dae's name, Tae-ho. Soo Yoon-dao didn't look shocked, because he knew he'd be recognized sooner or later. He told Young-si that he would apply for a retrial of the murder case from 15 years ago. He'll make sure that those who deserved it are punished, and that his mother gets justice. But Young-si told him that was impossible. He ignored it and left. But before he could get out of the gate, two prosecutors arrested him for embezzlement. It turns out that Young-si is behind this too. She had a hacker transfer a large sum of money to Hyo Yoon-da's account. Then she reported him. At that time, Soo-hee, who knew about Soo Yoon-da's arrest, came over. Young-si took away the others and sat down face to face with Soo-hee. She told them to give up on the murderer. Soo-hee firmly refused. He said he'd do whatever it takes to get to the bottom of the case. Young-si saw that Moseok's attitude was so strong, so she didn't force him to do anything. The battle between the two women has begun. At that moment, Detective O suddenly received a transfer order from the traffic division. He was shocked and angry. Then his wife called to tell him that someone was searching his house. On the other hand, Fu-ki and Gang Mi returned to the office after dinner and are stunned by the scene. Fu-ki immediately realized that it must be Top's work. At the same time, a group of people were rushing to Soo Yoon-dae's father's restaurant. After presenting a search warrant, they started rummaging through the boxes. No matter what his father said, they not only ignored him but pushed him to the ground. At that moment, Soo-hee came to Fu-ki's office. Looking at the mess on the floor, Gang Mi told her that all the data had been taken. Detective O also told Soo-hee about his family's predicament. They both know that this is Top's warning. Soo-hee felt guilty. Because of her own business, she got everyone into trouble. Suddenly she remembered Young-si's threat. She ran out immediately. Sure enough, after Soo Yoon-dao was arrested, Young-si found his father. She pressured him to persuade Soo Yoon-dao not to retract the case. His father was convinced that his son had been framed. He was unwilling to give in to the evil forces against his son's will. Seeing this, Yong-si began to threaten to put Xu Yundao in jail for the rest of his life. Just as she was turning to leave, Xu Yundao's father stopped her. He threw water in her face. He said he would never give in to them. After Yong-si left, Xu Yundao's father burst into tears. Su-hee also came over. He knelt down and begged her to save Xu Yundao. Su-hee agreed without hesitation. On the other side, the one who tried Xu Yundao was Tae-hyung, who was holding Su-hee. Su-hee came to the prosecutor's office. He ran into Tae-hyung, who had just come out. The two of them taunted each other again. Xu Yundao blamed himself for seeing Su-hee. Because of his carelessness, Yong-si was able to take advantage of the situation. Su-hee said that the most important thing now is to find a way to save him. He also advised him to bow down to Yong-si and stop the case. Xu Yundao knows Yong-si's character very well. If he gives in, Yong-si will send him to jail. He analyzed that the arrest warrant was signed by Prosecutor Zhou. Su-hee told Xu Yundao that he would be rescued, so he immediately went to Fu-ki, Detective O, and Gang Mi. Seeing that the three were afraid of the last top's warning, she brought out the evidence of Yong-si's recording of his grandfather's murder. After listening to the evidence, the trio's fighting spirit was rekindled. Since Xu Yundao only had 48 hours to defend himself, Su-hee went to Wan-su's studio. She praised Wan-su a lot. She praised him as the family's most suitable heir. She also deliberately provoked the relationship between Wan-su and Yong-si. She even suggested sending Yong-si away. Wan-su knew that Yong-si was trying to prevent him from becoming the heir to the family. After hearing Su-hee's words, he also had an idea in his mind, so he immediately went to Yong-si to find out more. The result was not unexpected. Yong-si advised him to focus on his art and not on the group. He said he would make sure that Wan-jun would be the heir apparent. Wan-su was not convinced. He then went to his father, Chul-hee, and told him that Yong-si was going to advance Wan-jun's succession to the presidency. He exaggerated Yong-si's ability. Chul-hee was shocked to hear that, and his pent-up resentment made him want to replace Yong-si. When Wan-su returned home, Wan-su immediately told Su-hee about Chul-hee's attitude. Su-hee was very happy. At that time, Fu-ki also called and said that he had collected new evidence of bribe taking from Prosecutor Cho. Su-hee met with Prosecutor Zhou again with this evidence. She demanded the immediate release of Xu Yundao and the arrest of Yong-si. She also said she wouldn't apply for a retrial of the murder case. If she didn't, she'd release the evidence to the press. Prosecutor Zhou was a bit shaken, but he's still afraid of Yong-si's tactics. Su-hee saw his concern. He told him to talk to his father, Chul-hee. Prosecutor Cho was pressured to find Chul-hee, and he agreed to arrest Yong-si. Xu Yundao was released that night. Seeing Su-hee waiting at the door, he couldn't hold back his love any longer. They kissed. The next day Yong-si saw that 46 hours had passed since the plea time. She picked up her cell phone to ask where Xu Yundao was being held. Then Su-hee walked into the office with Xu Yundao. This surprised everyone in the room. Yong-si had no idea that Su-hee could be so powerful. Then Detective O came in with an arrest warrant. Yong-si was arrested just like that. Yoon Sang-won, a member of TOP, quickly reported to Chul-hee, but Chul-hee didn't panic and told him to choose a new successor. Yoon Sang-won was shocked. Then he turned around and left. On the other hand, when Yoon Sang-won returned to his office, he didn't follow Chul-hee's advice. He immediately planned to rescue Yong-si. At that moment, Wan-jun came to ask about it, because he knew that Yong-si was the only one who could put him on the throne. After hearing Yoon Sang-won say that Yong-si would return soon, he left in peace. The scene changes. Tae-hyung is still examining Yong-si in the interrogation room, as he wonders why the Mkungs are being arrested in turn. Yoon Sang-won came in as a lawyer's advocate. He told Yong-si that Prosecutor Cho met with Chul-hee. He suspects that both of them did it. Yong-si said that Su-hee used Wan-su to compel Chul-hee, and then led Prosecutor Cho to do it. She told Yoon Sang-won to take care of all the physical evidence. On the other side, Su-hee and the others are cheering for their victory. All the evidence is ready. Xu Yundao decided to quietly apply for a retrial of the murder case, and then announce it to the media. Su-hee suddenly grabbed Xu Yundao and said he was going to war with his family, and Xu Yundao, as her personal lawyer, had a duty to protect her, so she took the opportunity to stay at Xu Yundao's house. The next day, Yoon Sang-won stopped Prosecutor Cho. He told him about Xu Yundao's reopening of the case. He got nervous. In the interrogation room, Tae-hyung was interrogating Yong-si. Prosecutor Cho came in with the news. He told his son to release him immediately. Tae-hyung was shocked. Yong-si looks like he's been expecting it. The scene changes. The two of them come to the lobby. Yong-si asks Prosecutor Cho why he let Xu Yundao go. He is speechless and says he only trusts Yong-si now. He asks for her help to stop the retrial of the murder case. Yong-si scolds him for always being too eager. Then she turned around and left. On the other hand, Fu-ki was the first to hear the news of Yong-si's release. He called Su-hee and Xu Yundao. They had no choice but to go head-to-head. A press conference was held in Fu-ki's office. Xu Yundao represented his mother and Soon's lawyer. In front of the media, Xu Yundao announced that he would overturn the murder case of 15 years ago. Inside the Mao family's mansion, Chulhe's family saw Xu Yundao's report. They were all speechless with astonishment. Chulhe had no choice but to call Yongxi again. Yongxi, who had just escaped from danger, came in dressed in red. She expressed her loyalty to the group. From this moment on, Chulhe deeply felt Yongxi's terror. When she got home, Suhe went straight to her father's office. Chulhe asked her if she came back to the country just to investigate the murder case. Suhe admitted it without hesitation. He said he would find out the truth. Yongshu came in a panic. He reprimanded her for causing a disturbance. Suhe suspected that the murderer was someone in the family. Seeing Suhe's firm attitude, Chulhe was shaking with anger. He told his wife not to do anything rash as she did back then. Leave everything to Yongxi. What are they hiding? On the other hand, Yongxi gathered the top team. He decided to expose Prosecutor Cha's scandalous information to the media to divert the public's attention from the murder case back then. All over the city, Prosecutor Cha's news was broadcasted. His former glory has been turned into a prisoner in no time. Under pressure, Prosecutor Zhou took the initiative to resign. He even let the media do an interview. But Yongxi saw the interview and decided it wasn't enough. He ordered his son to get involved. Soon Taehyung was suspended from the organization. Prosecutor Cho was forced to commit suicide for the sake of his son's future. Yongxi's goal was accomplished. At Prosecutor Cha's funeral the next day, Suhe and Yongxi came to the funeral at the same time. When they met, they looked at each other and said nothing. Then they went into the room. Taehyung was surprised to see them. After the funeral, Yongxi looked at Taehyung thoughtfully. Taehyung knew that the woman in front of him had driven his father to his death, but his face was filled with anger and helplessness. Suhe on the side also saw Taehyung's hostility towards Yongxi. The scene changes. Back to the office. Won-soo found Yongxi again. He asked her for the 30% share, but Yongxi doesn't want to talk to him at all. Seeing Yongxi with such an attitude, Won-soo couldn't hold back any longer, so he broke the shocking news about the Mao family. It turns out that the old chairman had an illegitimate daughter 30 years ago, but Yongxi didn't know anything about it. After Won-soo left, Yongxi was deep in thought. She suspected that Suhe was the old chairman's illegitimate daughter, so she sent someone to bring Butler Young here. After revealing Suhe's life, Butler Jung's face confirmed that her suspicion was right. It also cleared up a mystery in her mind. She then realized why the old chairman was so adamant about inheriting the group to Suhe. After receiving the exact confirmation, Yongxi went to Chulhe with a paternity certificate from Butler Young. She asked him why he preferred to give the company to Won-soo rather than the better Suhe. Chulhe looks puzzled. Yongxi said that Butler Young had already testified. He handed Chulhe the paternity certificate. Knowing the truth, Chulhe couldn't stand the excitement and fainted. Apparently, he didn't know Suhe's real identity before. On the other hand, Suhe had no idea about his birth. They were discussing how to find evidence against Yongxi through Taehyung. At that moment, she received news that Chulhe was hospitalized. She rushed to the hospital. Chulhe was still unconscious with an oxygen mask on her bed. Won-soo looked worried. On the side, Won-jun and Yongshu let out a deep breath. Only Suhe was worried. When she came out, she asked Yongxi why, but Yongxi didn't tell the truth. But as soon as she got back to the office, she immediately gathered the top members and told them that Suhe is the old chairman's daughter. Yongxi was worried that Suhe would fight for the shareholding when she found out. This would conflict with Won-jun's heir apparent. After discussing the matter, they decided to block Suhe's financial power to prevent her from expanding her shareholding. At the same time, Yongxi approached Won-jun about taking over the presidency early. Suhe was still worried about Chulhe outside the hospital. She doesn't realize that Yongxi has already countered her. Luckily, housekeeper Young escaped top surveillance and found Suhe again. She planned to tell Suhe the truth. At the same time, Yongxi was standing alone in front of the office window. She knew that Butler Young, who escaped, had already told Suhe the truth. Suhe couldn't believe the truth. She asked Mr. Young where her real mother was, so Young told her everything that happened back then. Suhe couldn't believe it. She stumbled away. Xu Yundao followed her silently. Suhe remembered her mother's care for her. He also remembered his grandfather's true love for him. Now the two people who loved her the most are gone. She crouched on the ground and cried. The next day came quickly. On the roadside bench, Xu Yundao was still comforting Suhe, but by now she had calmed down. So she talked to Xu Yundao about how to get the situation back. Xu Yundao told her that she could use her status as the old chairman's daughter to demand her shares back from the people. Suhe heard this and went to Yongxi. He asked her if she told Chulhe about her life, and that's why he's in a coma. Yongxi said she would honor the truth. She also told her that she had the paternity certificate that proved his birth. Suhe wasn't surprised. Instead, she said that she respected the truth, but her family has to respect the fact that she's her grandfather's daughter. At night, the three of them were having dinner at the Zybitsis mansion. Then Suhe came in. She sat down on the master's chair. This behavior stunned everyone in the room. Then Suhe revealed her identity as the old chairman's daughter. Yongshu didn't believe her. After Butler Young confirmed it himself, they were even more shocked. No one thought that she'd become the master of the house. The scene changes. In the office, mother and son called Yongxi. After realizing the truth, Won-jun and Yongshu got nervous. They rushed to ask Yongxi if Suhe would fight for the inheritance again. Yongxi told them firmly that the situation would not change, because Suhe doesn't have any proof of his birth yet. Hearing this, The hearts of the two men were finally relieved. Looking at Won-jun, who was full of pride, Won-soo was not satisfied. That night, he approached Soo Yoon-dao. He wanted Soo-hee to win. He asked him if there was any legal way for Soo-hee to get more shares. Soo Yoon-dao said that unless the holders of the shares transferred or gave them away, Won-soo knew that his 10% stake was useless. So the next day, he approached Yong-si again. He forced him to fulfill his promise of 30% shares. When Yong-si saw that he was still so stubborn, he revealed that Won-soo was the murderer of Soo-hee's mom. What is the truth? Years ago, Yong-soo tearfully asked Chul-hee why he was still in contact with Soo-hee's mom, but Chul-hee ignored her and left. This scene was seen by Won-soo behind the screen. He came out to comfort his mother, but Yong-soo said that the only way to get a foothold in the Mao family is to study hard. Won-jun, who studied hard, was the key. He accuses Won-soo of being his own undoing. The scene changes. Soo-hee's mother's villa. It turns out that she's overheard Won-jun's secret of disguising as a woman. Won-jun is pleading with her not to reveal it. Soo-hee's mother said she understood and promised to keep it a secret. Won-jun had just left. Yong-soo, who couldn't find Chul-hee, came over. He got into an argument with Soo-hee's mother. She threatened to divorce her and stay away from the Mo family. While she was working on her canvas in a sulky mood, the bell at the door rang again. It turned out that Won-soo was trying to help her mother get rid of her fear, so she came to her alone with her mother's wine. Won-soo kneels down and begs Soo-hee's mother to divorce her father, in order to make her mother happy. Soo-hee's mother became even more agitated when she heard Won-soo's request. She turned around and looked at the painting that she had ruined. She called it her failure, but she didn't realize that she had touched Won-soo's heart. Won-soo killed Soo-hee's mother in a fit of rage. When Chul-hee arrived, Soo-hee's mother had already collapsed in a pool of blood. When he saw the red wine on the floor, he thought Yong-seo or Won-seo had committed the crime, so he called Yong-si immediately. Yong-si quickly called Soo Yoon-dao's mother in soon, and faked the scene. Thus, the murder was solved by Yong-si's operation. For 15 years, each of them had their own agenda, and never spoke of it again. Now, Yong-si tried to stop Won-soo from helping Soo-hee by pointing out that he was the murderer. Won-soo could only leave with a heavy heart after seeing his secret exposed. Soon the shareholders' meeting started. Won-jun also looks like he's determined to win. The meeting started soon. All the shareholders unanimously approved Won-jun's successor as chairman. Just as the presiding officer was announcing the approval, the scene of déjà vu happened again. Milk Witch and Soo-hee arrived at the meeting, and Milk Witch surprised everyone with her presence. She also told Mr. Yong-si that he had left a paternity test with her, so Soo Yoon-dao announced it at the meeting, and then she redistributed the shares, but it was still a little less than Won-jun's. That's when the Milk Witch spoke up. She said she'd transfer all her shares to Soo-hee. Soo-hee became the largest shareholder of the group. Won-jun's inauguration ceremony had to be suspended. The next day at breakfast time, Soo-hee was waiting at the restaurant. Mother and son arrived one after another. When they were all seated, Soo Yoon-dao came in with the police. They arrested Yong-soo and Won-jun for tax evasion and illegal transfer of funds respectively. Fo-ki had secretly collected this evidence for fear of Yong-si's retaliation. He didn't realize it would come in handy. Seeing his mother and Won-jun being taken away, Won-soo realized it was his turn, but Soo-hee and Soo Yoon-dao had no evidence of his crime. That's when Won-soo spoke up. He said he sent a file to Tae-hyung. He hoped that the two of them could check it out for themselves. In the video, Won-soo confessed to killing Soo-hee's mother. Tae-hyung told them both. Won-soo always wanted to confess to Soo-hee in person, but he never had the will. At that moment, Detective Oh went to arrest Won-soo, but when he arrived, he had already killed himself. On the other hand, Yong-si was overwhelmed with emotion as she watched all that was happening in the Mu family. She knew that things had reached an irreversible point, so she decided to disband the top team. Looking at the members of the top group, who had been through the storm together in the past, even the hard-hearted Yong-si's eyes became moist. From this moment on, the top era led by Yong-si officially came to an end. The scene changes. Soo-hee and Soo Yoon-dao came to Won-soo's tombstone. They have mixed feelings. At that moment, Tae-hyung called Soo Yoon-dao and told him that Yong-si had disappeared. Just as they arrived at the prosecutor's office, Yong-si came to the prosecutor's office. They were surprised. Yong-si said he's a straight shooter. Then he marched into the interrogation room. Soon the court was in session. Yong-si readily confessed to all the crimes he had committed. Soo Yoon-dao's mother was also cleared of any wrongdoing. The courtroom applauded. That night, Soo-hee invited everyone who had helped him to the mansion. Fo-ki won an award for his feature story on the murders, and Detective Oh was promoted. This was the result of their risky choice of justice. Soo Yoon-dao's father was even happier. They all sat down together to celebrate their victory. Soo-hee planned to go back to America again soon after. Before she left, she visited Chul-hee in the hospital. Looking at Chul-hee lying on the bed, in her heart, she thought of her as her father. She told Mr. Young to take good care of Chul-hee and left. 2 years later, Soo Yoon-dao came to the police station in a hurry. He didn't expect to meet Soo-hee again. The night is falling. The two of them are walking together. Soo-hee learned that Soo Yoon-dao had remained true to his heart all these years. She then confessed her love for Soo Yoon-dao. The two lovers who have been through so much are finally happy together.